The NFL draft is fast approaching. So which position should the Cardinals address? With the draft less than a week away, I decided to rank what I think are the top 10 positions the Cardinals should consider addressing. But before we get to the list, I'd like to discuss the things I considered while constructing these rankings. The first thing I looked at was the current roster depth. What I was looking for here was whether the Cardinals have enough depth at the position or if they need an upgrade at that position. I also looked at the age and contract status of the Cardinals' current players at the position. In some cases, the Cardinals have good players at the position, but those players might be near retirement, or their contracts might be set to expire after the season. So in this regard, I was looking at whether the Cardinals needed to plan for the future at the position. I also looked at positional value. Some positions, quite simply, are more important to success in the NFL than other positions. I also took into account the availability or scarcity of talent at the position. This has to do in general with how easy or difficult it is to find a serviceable player at that position. Finally, I considered the developmental learning curve for the position. There are some positions like running back where a player can step in the first year and make an impact, while other positions like tackle and tight end tend to take more time for the player to develop. So in those positions with a steeper learning curve, I looked at whether the Cardinals need to plan for the future and draft someone who will be a starter in a year or two. Whereas a position where a player can make a more immediate impact, it might not be as important that the Cardinals draft someone this year as long as they've got good players at that position. So, with that all said, let's get into the rankings. At number 10, I have offensive tackle. Now, overall, the Cardinals are in a good situation with this position group. At left tackle, they have DJ Humphries, who had a breakout season in 2020. He was rated the 4th best tackle in the NFL by PFF. At right tackle, the Cardinals have Kelvin Beachum. Beachum is a solid veteran with an affordable contract, and he played reasonably well last year. They also have some decent depth at the position. Their backups include Justin Murray, who started multiple games at guard and tackle over the last couple of seasons for the Cardinals, and second-year tackle Josh Jones, who the Cardinals drafted in the 3rd round last year. Jones didn't play many snaps last year, and he did struggle some when he saw the field, but he was a highly rated prospect coming out of college, and tackles usually take a couple years to develop. So he still has a good chance to become a starting player within the next year or two. So while the Cardinals are overall in a good position when it comes to tackle, there is still room to upgrade at right tackle if a really great player were to fall to them. Or they might look to find another developmental player late in the draft. But in general, if they don't add any players at tackle, they're going to be in pretty good shape this season. At number 9, I have safety. Overall, the Cardinals have good depth at this position with Budda Baker, Deontay Thompson, Jalen Thompson, Sean Williams, a couple more veterans like Chris Banjo and Charles Washington. And depending how they use him, you might include Isaiah Simmons as part of this group. But despite all that depth, Budda Baker is the only real stud at this position. And if someone that they consider a first-round talent were to drop into the 2nd round, it wouldn't shock me if they looked to upgrade that starting position across from Budda. But like tackle, I do think this is a position that they probably won't place a high priority on in the draft. At number 8, I have inside linebacker. Jordan Hicks and Isaiah Simmons are likely to be the starters at this position, with Tanner Vallejo as the next man on the depth chart. Beyond that, we're looking at players like Evan Weaver and maybe some other practice squad type players. They do need to add some depth at this position, but I didn't rate it higher because it's not a position that tends to be valued high in the NFL. Most teams will fill out the back end of this position group with undrafted free agents, veteran journeymen, late round picks. So while I would expect the Cardinals are going to add 1 or 2 players at this position, they may not do it through the draft. At number 7, I have guard. The Cardinals are pretty deep at this position with Justin Pugh, Brian Winters, Justin Murray, Lamont Gaillard, Max Garcia, but they don't have any real stars at the position. Justin Pugh is their best guard and is probably going to start at left guard. And right guard is shaping up to be a competition between Brian Winters and Justin Murray, and maybe a few of the other players on the roster. Now, while they may not have any elite players at the position, this is a pretty typical group of guards for the NFL. And if the Cardinals go into 2021 with this as their group of guards, I wouldn't be worried about that. But it is a position where there is room for an upgrade. So if a guard that the Cardinals really like falls to them in the draft, it wouldn't shock me if they did try to upgrade the position. Next up, at number 6, I have interior defensive line. Now, J.J. Watt may occasionally line up on the interior defensive line. That's one of the things that makes him great. that he's so versatile, and throughout his career he's often been moved around like a chess piece. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm including him with the edge rushers. So if you take J.J. Watt out of the equation, this position group includes a number of young players like Lecky Fotu and Zach Allen and Rashard Lawrence, plus veteran Jordan Phillips, who the Cardinals signed as a free agent last year. Unfortunately, Phillips struggled last year and hasn't had the impact that the Cardinals had hoped he would. What the Cardinals need more than anything, though, at this position is a dependable nose tackle. Corey Peters filled that role for them for the last number of years, but is currently unsigned. Overall, this is one of the weaker position groups on the Cardinals roster. And if it weren't for the fact that it ranks low in positional value, it would have been much higher on my list. At number 5, I have running back. Now I know this is probably where a lot of people are going to disagree with me, and that's okay. The reason I didn't rank them higher is because I like the players they have going into 2021. James Conner and Chase Edmonds make a nice pair of complementary backs. We don't know whether Eno Benjamin is going to contribute this year, and if he doesn't, they definitely need to add at least one more running back to the mix. But I think they can do that late in the draft or through free agency. Also, this is one of those positions where players can often come in and have an immediate impact. So it's not as vital that the Cardinals are looking to the future with this position as with some of the other positions we're talking about. At number 4, I have edge rusher. Now this is another one that I think some people will probably disagree with me on. And that's okay, I get it. The Cardinals have good players at this position. They have Chandler Jones, J.J. Watt, and they have good depth. Marcus Golden, Devon Kennard, Dennis Gardeck. But the reason I put this position as high as I did is because a lot of the players I have are older players like J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones. Marcus Golden is in his 30s. And as much as people love Dennis Gardeck and as much as he was a great story last year, he had success in a really small sample size and doesn't have a track record as a pass rusher. Pass rusher is one of those positions where players often need a year or two to develop. So while we're going into 2021 with a really strong pass rush, this is a position that we need to plan for the future in order not to be caught off guard. In fact, it wouldn't shock me if the Cardinals went with a pass rusher in the first or second round. Next up is receiver. Now we all know DeAndre Hopkins is an absolute stud, one of the best receivers in the league, if not the best. AJ Green has been a great pro throughout his career, but there are some question marks going into 2021. He had a really tough year in 2020, struggling to get open and create separation. But he was also playing in a really tough situation with a rookie quarterback who then got injured, and then he's playing with a backup quarterback. So there's reason to hope he could have a better season here in Arizona. Now, we don't know if Larry Fitzgerald's going to be back, but even if he is, he's not really the answer to what the Cardinals need right now. What the Cardinals need is a dynamic playmaker who's great after the catch and can take the top off the defense. Now, Christian Kirk has shown flashes and he's talented, but he's not been consistent enough to be that guy. And unfortunately, Andy Isabella has not lived up to what the Cardinals had hoped. Now, overall, I wouldn't say that the receiver situation for the Cardinals is dire, but they do need to look to the future, and if they get the right playmaker in the draft, he could make an immediate impact in 2021. At number 2, I have tight end. After losing Dan Arnold in free agency, the Cardinals are left with Max Williams and Darrell Daniels as the only two returning players at this position. Williams is known more for his blocking than his receiving, and Daniels is more of a depth player than a starter. This is one of the weakest position groups on the roster, and the Cardinals definitely need to add at least one or two players between now and training camp. But tight end doesn't have the same positional value as the number 1 position on my list, which is cornerback. Now, anyone who follows the Cardinals shouldn't be surprised by this. This has been discussed as the number 1 need for the Cardinals for months. And it makes sense. Patrick Peterson left as a free agent. The Cardinals didn't bring back some of their other players like Dre Kirkpatrick. In fact, the only 2 players of note returning are Byron Murphy Jr. and Robert Alford. Murphy is an outstanding slot corner, and he should be their starter at that position. Alford has starting experience, but unfortunately, he's missed the last 2 seasons with injuries. Now, the Cardinals did address the position in free agency by signing Malcolm Butler from Tennessee, but they still need to add at least 2 or 3 more players to the roster at this position. And ideally, at least one of those players would be someone that they add through the draft. And preferably, it would be someone that they draft in one of the first couple of rounds who has the potential to become a starter. So what do you think are the most important positions the Cardinals need to address in the draft? Tell me in the comments below, I'd love to hear. And while you're at it, please be sure to click like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Cardinal Rule.